The end is finally here. After everything that's happened across 5 seasons of bloodshed, betrayals, shocking deaths, and absolute chaos, The Boys is preparing for what could be the most brutal episode that this universe has ever delivered. And after watching the trailer for Season 5 Episode 8, it genuinely feels like nobody is safe anymore. Not Homelander, not Butcher, not the Seven, and maybe not even the world itself. Because this trailer didn't just tease one final battle. It teased complete destruction. We saw Butcher looking more dangerous than ever before, Homelander appearing completely unstable, Annie preparing for war, and the virus now becoming the center of everything. But the scariest part about this trailer is the feeling that the show is no longer building toward a happy ending. It's building toward sacrifice, toward revenge, toward extinction. And honestly, there are several moments in this trailer that could secretly reveal exactly how Homelander dies, and who survives the finale. So with that, I wanted to break down the trailer for The Boys Season 5 Episode 8, and also give my theories and predictions on what I think is really going to happen in the final ever episode. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. So the very first thing that stood out to me in this trailer was the overall tone, because it felt completely different from the rest of the season. There was this dark and hopeless atmosphere hanging over every single scene. And I think that's because the show is finally reaching the point where there's no going back anymore. Throughout the entire series, there has always been this idea that maybe things could somehow be fixed, that maybe there was still humanity left inside certain characters, or maybe there was a way to stop Homelander without destroying everything around him. But after what we saw in the previous episode, it genuinely feels like all of that hope is disappearing. Especially for Butcher. Because the moment we heard his voice speaking during the trailer, it became very clear that his mindset has changed once again. And honestly, I think Frenchie's death is going to be the thing that completely breaks him. We've seen Butcher lose people before. We saw what happened with Becca. We saw the damage that Homelander caused to his life. But Frenchie dying feels different because it happened after Butcher already promised that he wouldn't cross certain lines again. He previously said that he wouldn't release the virus and wipe out every soup on the planet. However, after this trailer, I don't think he cares anymore. I think he's fully accepted that the only way to end this nightmare is to destroy all soups completely. And when he said that superheroes are done, it honestly sounded less like a threat and more like a promise. What makes this even more terrifying is that Butcher might actually succeed. Because the trailer repeatedly focused on the virus container, and every time we saw it, the tension immediately increased. This wasn't just being shown for dramatic effect. I think the virus is going to become the central focus of the finale. And if Butcher truly believes that there's no difference between Homelander and every other soup, then in his mind, releasing the virus would actually be saving humanity. That's the scary thing about Butcher as a character. Even when his intentions come from pain and grief, he still convinces himself that the most extreme solution is the correct one. And after losing Becca, after everything Ryan has gone through, and now potentially losing Frenchie too, I think he's reached the point where he no longer sees any other path forward. The problem is that not everyone in The Boys is going to agree with him. I actually think this finale is going to split the group apart emotionally, because characters like Huey and Annie still believe that there's a line you shouldn't cross. They want to stop Homelander, but not at the cost of innocent lives. Meanwhile, Butcher probably thinks innocent lives are already being lost every single day, because soups exist in the first place, and that ideological conflict could become just as dangerous as the battle against Homelander himself. Another massive detail in the trailer was Homelander's behavior, because he looked more unstable than ever before. And honestly, I think his empire is finally starting to crack. Throughout the series, Homelander has always needed one thing more than power: love, validation, worship. He wants people to see him as perfect. But now he's no longer asking for admiration. He's demanding obedience. There's a huge difference between the two. And I think the moment Homelander started calling himself a god was the moment his downfall truly began. Because even his own followers are starting to fear him instead of love him. We saw hints of that in the trailer when certain characters looked terrified while standing near him. And I think that fear is going to spread across the entire country. Homelander has spent years pretending to be humanity's protector, but now the mask is slipping completely. He's becoming more violent, more paranoid, and more unpredictable. And the terrifying part is that he's strong enough to enforce his beliefs through fear alone. But the more control he tries to gain, the more resistance he's going to create. That's why I think the finale is going to show Homelander losing control of the very thing he always wanted most: the people. I also think Ryan is going to become one of the most important characters in this entire episode. Because despite everything that's happened, Ryan still represents the last piece of humanity connected to Homelander. He's the only person whose opinion genuinely matters to him emotionally. And after the previous episodes, it feels like Ryan is beginning to understand exactly who his father really is. The trailer showed them potentially meeting again, and honestly, I don't think that scene is going to be peaceful at all. In fact, I wonder if Ryan could secretly be working alongside the boys in order to lure Homelander into a trap. Because if there's one thing that could make Homelander vulnerable emotionally, it's the idea of losing Ryan completely. And that vulnerability might become the only opening that Butcher and the others need in order to finally take him down. At the same time though, I don't think this finale is simply going to be about defeating Homelander. I think it's going to be about deciding what kind of future deserves to survive afterward. Because if Butcher releases the virus, then even good soups like Annie and Kimiko could die too. And that's what makes this trailer feel so tense. Every character seems trapped between impossible choices. Save the world by sacrificing innocent people, or spare innocent people and risk Homelander surviving. And honestly, I think that moral conflict is exactly what this show has been building toward since the very beginning. One of the biggest things that caught my attention in this trailer was the fight between Annie and the Deep, because honestly, this doesn't just feel like another random superhero battle. It feels personal. It feels like years of hatred, trauma, anger, and revenge finally reaching a breaking point. Ever since season 1, Annie has carried the pain of what the Deep did to her when she first joined the Seven. That moment completely changed her view of Vought, superheroes, and the entire corrupt system that existed behind the scenes. And even though the show moved forward into larger storylines involving Homelander and the collapse of the country, that tension between Annie and the Deep has always remained underneath everything. So, seeing them finally preparing to fight one another in what looks like the Oval Office honestly feels symbolic. It's like the entire rotten system that destroyed so many lives is finally collapsing in on itself. And I genuinely think this battle could end with the Deep dying. The reason why I think that is because the trailer repeatedly focused on water and coastal locations during the final moments. Now, at first glance, that might not seem important, but with the Deep being involved, I don't think those shots were included accidentally. In fact, I think the fight between Annie and the Deep is eventually going to move outside toward the ocean. And that could become one of the most poetic deaths in the entire show. Because for years, the Deep has tried to convince himself that he was misunderstood. He constantly wanted approval. He wanted respect from Homelander. He wanted people to see him as important. But every single decision he made only pushed him further into becoming one of the most selfish and pathetic characters in the series. And now, after everything that's happened this season, he's more isolated than ever before. Even Homelander barely respects him anymore. The Seven has completely fallen apart. And after the previous episode showed the Deep ignoring people in danger, it feels like the world is finally beginning to see him for who he really is. That's why I think Annie could ultimately force him toward the ocean during their fight. And honestly, if that happens, I could see the sea life turning against him completely. We already saw hints that the creatures in the ocean were beginning to reject him after the environmental disasters and destruction connected to Vought's actions. So imagine how terrifying it would be if the very creatures that once worshipped the Deep suddenly became the reason for his death. It would be the perfect ending for his character. Not some heroic sacrifice. Not redemption. Just loneliness, fear, and finally facing consequences for the terrible things that he's done. And to be honest, I really don't see the Deep surviving this series anymore. His story feels like it's reaching its natural conclusion. At the same time, the White House itself seems like it's becoming the main battlefield of the finale. And that honestly makes perfect sense because this season has constantly shown how deeply Homelander's influence has infected the government and the country itself. The White House is supposed to represent leadership, stability, and control. But in this universe, it now feels like the center of fear. Throughout the trailer, there were several quick shots showing characters storming through hallways, running underground, and preparing for some kind of large-scale confrontation. And I think the reason why this feels so intense is because the finale is no longer just about superheroes fighting each other. It's about the complete collapse of authority. The world is literally watching the most powerful people on the planet turn against one another while chaos spreads everywhere. One moment that really stood out to me was seeing Mother's Milk moving through what looked like part of the White House carrying a weapon. And honestly, I think knows that this mission could be suicidal. Throughout the series, he's always been the grounded member of the group, the one trying to hold on to morality and keep everybody focused. But now, even he seems fully prepared for war. And I wonder if that's because he finally realizes there may not be another option left. Homelander has become too dangerous, too unstable, and too powerful to simply expose publicly anymore. The system failed to stop him. Politics failed to stop him. Fear failed to stop him. Which means violence might be the only thing remaining.